Good morning, everybody. Last month, we began a series on the Christian practice of welcoming other people. And I just want to do a quick refresher before we move on to the next part of this. The New Testament word for this practice is the word hospitality. In Greek, the word means the love of strangers. Hospitality turns others into brothers. And we do this because we have been on the receiving end of this. A primary part of the gospel good news is that Jesus has welcomed us into the family of God. We who were once strangers have now become family ourselves, which is why Paul writes this in Romans, "Therefore welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God." So we who were once strangers have been loved into family, and Jesus says, "Go and do likewise." The next week, Pastor Marcia talked specifically about using your home as an outpost for welcome. And she gave several ways in which you might think about being hospitable from your house. Today, I want to talk about using your table as a place of welcome. Breaking bread with others has been an important part of Christian history for centuries. The early church did not gather in rows facing a pulpit. They gathered in homes, circled around a table. And that practice, I would argue, is all the more crucial today because it's all the more countercultural today. I want to start by giving you some statistics about how we as Americans are eating lately. 75% of all restaurant orders are takeout now. So 3 out of 4 people, when they go to a restaurant, they're taking their food to go. 57% of meals are consumed alone. And that statistic is actually polled pre-pandemic. So I'd imagine that percentage has actually gone up today. There's been a 29% rise in solo dining reservations over the last 2 years. These are people who go out to eat by themselves. This is the largest increase on record. And then the last one there, 26% of all Americans, roughly 1 in 4, report eating all of their daily meals alone. I want to show you the graph from where that last statistic is being pulled from. A little bit hard to see here. So this is the graph showing this data over the past 20 years. So the vertical y-axis there is showing the percentage of people who are dining alone in the U.S. You can see that the number of people who are regularly eating meals alone has gone up 10 percentage points since 2003. Used to be about 1 in 6 people this was true of. Now it's over 1 in 4 people. You can also see there that in the year 2020, there was a spike. Understandable, right? The pandemic kept us largely at home. But then what do you notice about the year 2023, which is the last year that's recorded on that slide? It kept going up. So even when things got, quote, back to normal, we didn't rebound after the pandemic. Rather, we picked up new habits and we doubled down on them. Now, eating alone is happening more and more for a variety of reasons. It's not just COVID to blame. There are more one-person households than ever before. More and more people are opting to pay more to live alone rather than to get a roommate or live with a partner. Also, remote work jobs are on the rise, which means that for mealtime, you're not eating in a lunchroom with coworkers, you're eating at home because that's your workplace. This trend is also not just because there's more single people than usual. This is happening amongst families as well, as busy schedules and multiple commitments fragment time that families can spend with each other. Believe it or not, work commutes also factor in here. People are driving longer distances and longer times on the road, which means that drive-through food and grab-and-go options become a necessity to get your meals in. The smartphone is another factor here because it gives people the illusion of connection while they eat by themselves. You know, meal times historically have been this essential place where we connect with other people, but now socializing is available on demand. 24/7 at our fingertips. And so it doesn't seem as urgent to arrange time to eat with other people. But of course, we know that online connection and face-to-face connection are two very different things. You know, the shift that actually surprises me the most that's rising is dining alone in restaurants. It used to be that solo dining was highly stigmatized, But now it's becoming more and more of a trend, especially in Asian countries. There's a South Korean word for this, actually, honbap. Honbap. It's a compound word. Honja is the word for alone, and then bap is the word for rice, or more generally, just food. So together the word means eating alone. Well, as honbap has caught on more and more, restaurants have begun to cater to this trend. So in Japan, there is this chain of ramen shops called Ichiran, and it's locally known as the antisocial ramen restaurant. The experience is completely individualized and isolated. You sit in front of a counter that has been partitioned all around. And when you're ready, you fill out your little meal ticket and you slide it in. And eventually, the shutter that's in front of you opens up. A cook passes you your ramen and then closes it again for you to enjoy in peace. One food blogger wrote about the environment. Each patron, including myself, was enshrouded by a 3-panel curtain. There were people on both sides of me, but with faces I didn't see and voices I didn't hear. The place was completely silent except for the kitchen staff. Because of this outward seating arrangement and curtain covering, no one had to risk conversation or chance of eye contact. Ichiran has now opened up a shop in New York City, and it has become a huge novelty to try. The restaurant is the one with the big kind of red seal there, and you can see the line for this restaurant is stretching down that ramp towards the waterfront. People just can't wait to get in to experience this solo ramen experience. It's being heralded by food influencers as a noodle shop for introverts, a place of quiet and calm. But it's not just Japanese ramen shops that are catering to this trend. This move away from eating with other people is getting designed into our homes. Designated dining areas are on the decline in home architecture today. For many people, the dining room just collects dust until the holidays roll around. More and more people are just eating at kitchen counters or in the living room in front of the TV. And so to accommodate this shift in family life, new homes are being designed kind of like this, with what are called open concept floor plans. These make limited square footage feel larger, more open. The kitchen, the dining room, and the living room are all kind of being combined into this large multi-purpose area. And many people, when they move into a space like this, they just opt out on having a table at all because it would hog so much of the space. Now, more and more people are living alone. We said that earlier. So this shift does make some sense. But the side effect of this is that one of the primary places of the home where relationships are strengthened, face-to-face, over food, that's being eliminated from the structure of daily life. One writer at The Atlantic said that this architectural shift is, quote, designing loneliness into our floor plans. So you've got honbap, which is eating alone. I want to give you a contrasting compound word, the word companion. This word has Latin origins. It's made up of cum, which means together, and panis, which means bread. So a companion is someone that you eat with. Food creates friends. This has been an essential part of human community for millennia. And our solitary suppers are costing us something. And this is not just my personal opinion. There are social science studies that identify and quantify a direct correlation between eating with others and quality of life. The World Happiness Report is an annual survey on global well-being. What they do is they ask people how happy and satisfied they are on a scale of 1 to 10 with where their life is currently at. And then they survey these people on a wide range of factors and life circumstances. So what this survey tells us is a perceived sense of well-being and what that might be rooted in. The United States, it may deeply shock you to learn, is becoming increasingly unhappy as a country. In 2012, we ranked 11th globally in terms of happiness. In 2025, we're now 24th. It's a new low for us. Now, you could point to many reasons for this decline in happiness, but the researchers of this study identified a very interesting correlation. They saw that as the number of Americans eating alone increased, the happiness of our country decreased. And this was true across all demographics. So this graph here, again, a little bit hard to read here. The vertical axis is that happiness meter. It's how satisfied people were with life. And the color's kind of hard to see. The colors that's on the right there, a little more purpley colored, is Americans who dine with other people. And then the lower bar on the right is people who dine alone. And then it's broken down by all sorts of demographic. And this pattern holds consistent. And it holds consistent not just in the United States. Across countries, people consistently evaluated their lives more poorly if they were not eating meals with other people. In fact, the researchers even said, catch this, they said that asking whether a person shared at least one meal with other people in the past week, that was a stronger predictor of well-being than income and unemployment combined. I bring all of this up because hospitality today is not just a good thing for us to do. I would argue that welcoming others over a meal is an act of Christian resistance. We are pushing back against the cultural temptation to fold in and retreat with our food. Instead, we're called to open up and welcome others. And we don't just do this because social science says that it will make us happier. I mean, that's a very nice perk, but that's not the reason that we do it. We do it because if we're serious about wanting to follow Jesus, then we will begin to realize that meal times are a prime opportunity for mission. So, turn with me, if you would, to the book of Luke, chapter 19. I want to walk you through a familiar story from the life of Jesus to show you how Jesus used his meals as a way of pursuing and welcoming other people. Luke chapter 19. And we're going to start at the beginning of the chapter. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. So note, is Jesus here for a long stay in Jericho? No, he's just passing through. And yet, as often is the case in his ministry, he's going to allow himself to be interrupted for the sake of other people. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. These two things often went hand in hand. To be a chief tax collector often meant great wealth. It often also meant dishonest wealth. Because if you were a tax collector, you could overcharge what people owed in order to skim money off the top. And that corruption, that greed went on unregulated. Next verse, Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was. But because he was short, he couldn't see over the crowd. So Zacchaeus ran ahead, and he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So Zacchaeus came down and welcomed him gladly. So Jesus calls Zacchaeus out by name, and then invites himself over for dinner, which is not necessarily something I would recommend you try. But it works out well here. Zacchaeus is happy to have Jesus over, which raises an interesting question. Who's welcoming who in this story? Is Zacchaeus welcoming Jesus, or is Jesus welcoming Zacchaeus? And the answer is yes, right? It's both. Jesus, he had no home, no table of his own, and yet he welcomed and hosted others by being a guest in their home. And this was a habit that consistently, regularly caused people to grumble. All the people saw this and began to mutter, "He's gone to be the guest of a sinner." So let's add to our picture here. Tax collectors were not just seen as greedy and dishonest, they were social pariahs. These were Jewish men who had sold out to the enemy empire of Rome in order to oppress their fellow countrymen. I mean, you could not sink any lower in moral standing than to be a tax collector or a prostitute. Tellingly, these are the very people that Jesus is often found eating with. I mean, this is kind of where we need to place ourselves within this time and place and culture, because in the ancient Near East, meal sharing was bond forming. Eating with others signaled this high level of closeness and belonging. with those that you were eating with. I mean, just listen to David's lament in Psalm 41. This is when people have turned against him later in his reign. He writes, "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me." David feels so betrayed because bread sharing was bond forming. I ate with you and you turned on me. So in Jesus' day, meals meant community ties. But the converse of this is that meals were also weaponized as a way to keep people apart. If you could deny where certain people could eat, that established clear societal boundary lines. And friends, that's an idea that did not die out in ancient times. I mean, think of the middle school cafeteria, where what table you sit at and who you're able to eat with determines your rank in the social hierarchy. Not knowing where to sit in the cafeteria, that's a common anxiety of adolescence because eating alone should be avoided at all costs. A more serious version of this would be the Jim Crow era of American history, where racial segregation laws were put in place, especially in restaurants, right? Because eating together meant belonging together. And so boundaries needed to be established to keep certain kinds of people out. So people are scandalized when Jesus would transgress the lines of social taboo in order to eat with sinners. You can talk with them, fine. Preach at them, great, they need it. I mean, you can even heal them if you want to, but to eat with them signaled incredible acceptance and welcome. And this is not the first time this has come up. Earlier back in chapter 5 of Luke, this exact same grumbling happened when Jesus went to go eat at the home of another tax collector, Levi, or also known as Matthew. Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teacher of the law, who belonged to their sect, complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I've not come to call the righteous, but to call sinners to repentance." So for the religious leaders, to have a rabbi consorting with sinners at meal times, that was blurring the lines between us and them. Unacceptable. Later in Luke chapter 15, this same issue comes up again. This is how the chapter begins. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." This is the same frustration for the Pharisees being recycled. Again, here is a religious teacher, one of us, who is welcoming the lowest of them. Now Jesus, seeing that the reason that he gave 10 chapters earlier clearly didn't stick, he triples down on the point he wants to make, this time with a series of parables. Luke chapter 15 has the parable of the lost sheep, and then the lost coin, and then the prodigal son. And all of these are variations on the same central theme of the pursuit and welcome of the Father. Jesus urges the religious leaders to have the heart of God, to pursue those who are lost and to participate in the welcome party, rather than grumbling about the guest list. Well, 4 chapters later, we're right back here again in the story of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is persona non grata. He is unwelcome anywhere, anytime. And the grumbling begins again about who Jesus chooses to eat with. But notice in here, who's complaining this time? It's not just the religious leaders. All the people are complaining that Zacchaeus is doing, or that Jesus is doing this. And yet Jesus says, "I would love to come over to your home." In fact, Jesus places himself in Zacchaeus' debt. He's the one asking to be hosted. And so they go into his home, and midway through the meal, this happens. Zacchaeus stood up, and he said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." So we don't know what exactly inspired this radical change in his heart. But what Luke does tell us is that it all began with welcome. Transformation happened at a table. Zacchaeus' life is forever changed because he was seen and welcomed. And I love how Jesus responds to him, "Today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham." I mean, Zacchaeus is unwanted and outcast in Jewish society. And Jesus is affirming that this man also has a place in the family of God. I mean, imagine just how much that would have meant to hear that from Jesus. And then Jesus returns to his reason for coming to this dinner in the first place. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. You know, Luke uses that phrase twice in his gospel. The Son of Man came. He uses it here in Luke 19 to outline what Jesus came to do. He came to find the lost and to rescue them. But earlier in Luke chapter 7, he records how Jesus went about doing this. Jesus says, the Son of Man came eating and drinking. So purpose, to find the lost and rescue them. Method, sharing meals at the table. I just want to run through here a list of Jesus' meals in Luke. Luke 5, he eats with tax collectors and sinners at the home of Matthew. Luke 7, he eats in the home of a Pharisee when a sinful woman comes in and anoints his feet. Luke 9, Jesus hosts more than 5,000 guests for a meal of bread and fish on a hillside. Luke 10, Jesus is eating in the home of Mary and Martha. Luke 11, he rebukes the hypocrisy of the Pharisees while enjoying a meal in one of their homes. Luke 14, he's in the home of another Pharisee on a Sabbath, and he talks about inviting the poor to their meals instead of just their friends. Luke 19, we just read, he's eating with Zacchaeus. Luke 22, Jesus is hosting the Passover meal with his disciples, and he likens himself to the bread and the wine. And then there's two meals in Luke 24. He has a meal with these two disciples in Emmaus, and then later in the chapter, he has this welcome back seaside breakfast with his disciples. Jesus loved to eat. So much so that people called him, do you remember this? A glutton and a drunkard. But Jesus was not gorging himself on food, he was indulging in hospitality. He loaded up his plate with invitation and welcome, and he always made sure to go back for seconds. I mean, meals were not Jesus' mission, but they were certainly his method. Now, you may have noticed as I went through that list of meals that Jesus is often in the home of a Pharisee. You notice that? Seems a little strange because he has such a reputation for eating with sinners and tax collectors, but he spends a fair amount of time dining with the religious elite. Why? Well, if you think back to Luke chapter 15, Jesus gets questioned about eating with sinners and tax collectors, and then he tells three parables. And think about who God is pursuing in each of these stories. So in the parable of the lost sheep, who does the shepherd pursue? The runaway lamb, right? In the parable of the lost coin, what does the woman pursue? The lost coin. In the parable of the prodigal son, who does the father pursue? That was a trick question. Because the father does not go out into the far-off country to find the younger son. The younger son comes to his senses when he hits rock bottom, and he decides to go back home. And as he arrives at home, his father runs out to meet him. But it seems kind of strange that Jesus would break the pattern of God pursuing sinners, right? We'll keep reading in that story because the father does pursue someone, doesn't he? He leaves the welcome party and he goes out looking for who? The older brother. He pleads for him to come in and celebrate that the lost have been found. Why does Jesus spend time eating in the home of the Pharisees? It's because he has a heart for lost sheep and older brothers. He wants to pursue those who know that they are lost and those who think that they are the only ones who aren't lost. Jesus is a host who wants to be a guest wherever. Here I am, he says, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and I will eat with that person and they with me. So when we talk about welcoming others around a table, welcoming others is a way of extending the invitation of Jesus to their life. We help to open up the hearts of other people so that Jesus can enter in. Friends, your table can be an outpost for evangelism. It could be the place where the gospel comes to life. Now, I'm using that word table loosely because you may not have a table in your home. Your living space may not be able to host other people in it. That's okay. When I use the word table, I'm just talking about the place where you have your meals. So this can be at home, or this can be at a restaurant, this can be at a park for a picnic. How can your meals be missional? How can your table be used to build bridges with others? How can you look for opportunities to have great food and great company? And when you do this, there are just two principles for what this ought to look like. First principle is serve love. Serve love. There's this great proverb in your Bible that says, better a small serving of vegetables with love than to have a fattened calf with hatred. Meaning, the menu does not matter when love is in the room. Meals are missional when love is being served. First, serve love. Second, host the Spirit. When you share meals as mission, the person that you're actually hosting is the Spirit of God. When you set the table and cook the food and wash the dishes, you're actually facilitating the work of God in the life of someone else. So whether you are making a meal from scratch, or you are ordering takeout to enjoy, or you're inviting people to go out to eat, or you're hosting a play date at the park with snacks, whatever you choose to do, serve love, host the Spirit. Welcome others to a meal that will fill them full. Would you pray with me? Father in heaven, thank you that we are invited to your table. And I pray that from that our lives would overflow with hospitality, that the meals we eat would not just be about recharging our own batteries, but that they would be opportunities to build connections with others and open up the door of their heart to you. Pray this in your name. Amen.